A controversial bill involving clergy is making progress in Olympia, and that tops this week's in-session coverage with Olympia Bureau Chief Drew Mickelson. So, Drew, tell us about this bill.
Hi, Christine. So right now, under current state law, if you're a teacher, a police officer, a doctor, and you suspect a child has been abused, you have to contact the authorities. Two bills that would add clergy to that list passed out of House and Senate committees this week here at the state capitol. The bills are written to include any member of the clergy, ministers, priests, rabbis, imams, elders. Under the law, if they have reasonable cause to believe a child has suffered either abuse or neglect, they would have to contact authorities. Those who testified against the bill say it would force clergy to violate policies guaranteeing privacy in confession, for example. But child advocates say it will prevent abuse.
This bill is for the safety of our children. It only applies to someone who is abusing a child. There should be no leniency for them. What would Jesus do is a foundational question every Christian must answer, but it is a universal question. Jesus said, "Let the little children come to me." I think Jesus meant that he would always be a safe place for children. Truth is, the confessional has not always been a safe place for children. Often their abuser priest was free to harm him or her again. The seal of confession protected him, not the child.
The seal of confession is inviolable. The priest cannot and will not break it. The consequence worldwide is excommunication and cannot change locally. This bill makes children less safe and not more safe. This bill will likely result in priests only hearing confessions anonymously behind a screen with no face-to-face option, which prevents us from being able to identify kids who are in trouble or for an abuser to see how serious we are with the expectation that they turn themselves in.
Priests today know how to move conversations about abuse out of the confessional and into a reportable context, and recognizes that discouraging parishioners from talking with their priests is likely to result in abuse continuing, including young victims who may go in thinking they've done something wrong and will never learn that they're not to blame because they're afraid to confess to the priest.
Child abuse is preventable. I could make the argument that every single one of us should be a mandatory reporter, but I will certainly argue that those in the faith community have a special close relationship with children and families, and that elevates them to a special responsibility.
Drew, we haven't heard much from Governor Bob Ferguson since he's taken office, but you tracked him down this past week.
We did. You know, he was sworn in almost a month ago and really hasn't made a lot of public appearances here at the Capitol. He hasn't held a formal press conference, so we haven't had a chance to really see what he thinks about some of the bills that are progressing. But on Wednesday, we were able to catch up with him after he made a speech to the Association of Washington Business, that's CEOs and business owners from across the state. When Ferguson took office, he said raising taxes would be a last resort when it comes to the state balancing its budget. And almost a month later, he says his opinion that cuts over tax increases has not changed.
We're not in a recession, but we have a significant budget shortfall. There were decisions that were made along the way that helped lead us to this shortfall, okay? And I'm determined as a governor to make sure we learn from mistakes that we made as a state in making decisions on how we budgeted. Assuming certain revenue growth that economic experts said was not going to happen. We shouldn't do that. That doesn't make sense to me, okay? And I think just like my family needs to live within my salary and my wife's salary for what we do and how we, raise our family, that's how the state's got to operate as well. And I understand that the message I delivered on my inaugural address, made some of my Democratic friends unhappy, okay? That's not exactly a secret in the hallways of Olympia, right? That made some of my... That's okay, everyone's entitled to their opinion, but one thing I'm communicating pretty clearly to anyone I'm talking to is, look, while I've inherited this shortfall, I don't plan to be having this conversation every year as governor. Don't plan on having that. Now, if force is beyond our control, right, there are recessions, of course things happen. Or as a business, as a family, right, or as a government, things do happen that you've got to adjust to. That I understand. But I'm convinced there are some things we can do to avoid this happening again in the future, and that is something I'm determined to do.
So, Drew, you also spoke with the governor about his hopes to provide free lunches to all public school students. Is that going to happen?
Well, that is something that he has gone on the record saying he would support. He wants K-12 students across the state to get free breakfasts and lunches. It's an idea that has a lot of support here on both sides of the aisle, but paying for it could be tricky. In Tumwater, 5 of the 6 elementary schools now qualify for free breakfasts and lunches based on average family income. But legislators and educators are calling for those restrictions to be lifted, saying every K-12 student in the state should receive free meals. At Peter G. Schmidt Elementary, there's no stigma or embarrassment for students who benefit. And the staff there says the better fed kids are performing better in class.
If you make the meals accessible, the kids want it, they'll eat it, and they need it. Because we also saw changes in behavior. So you have hungry kids showing up to class, there are certain behaviors there, and if we can give them access to nutritious meals, we see the difference.
Proposals by Democrats and Republicans would require free breakfast and lunch for all K-12 students starting in the 26-27 school year. It would be funded by the state for about $120 million every year. Despite the evidence and the support here at the Capitol, with legislators facing a budget deficit and already plans in the works to increase spending for transportation, special education, and maintenance costs, the idea of picking up the tab at the cafeteria for some students who can easily afford the meals may just not have enough votes.
There's no question here that this is something that we're positive about. We also know that it costs money, and unfortunately, we have limited resources, especially this year with a budget deficit.
And right now we've got some big challenges with our budget.
Governor Bob Ferguson requested the legislation, saying it's unacceptable for our students to go hungry.
I'm not going to be critical of any legislator who says, wait a second, this costs money and what's the top priority? I get that. But it's a pretty compelling case I think we're making. Look, if you're a single parent making $19 an hour, your kid does not qualify for free lunch and free breakfast at school. That's not okay, and that does need to change.
Back in Tumwater, administrators say spending money in the cafeteria is just as important as funding what happens in the classroom.
I understand that the legislature is forced with difficult choices, but they're also forced with a constitutional mandate to make sure that schools have ample provision. And so I wouldn't pose it as a choice, but a mandate.
Andrew, finally, Seahawks fans might have a special interest in one piece of legislation. Tell us about that one.
Yeah, not everyone pays attention to all the bills that get passed here because they don't think it affects them. If you're a Hawks fan, this is one that would be specially designed for you. It would officially designate December 12th, 12/12, as the state's Day of the 12s. It would not be a state holiday, so you don't get the day off, but 12/12 would be the state's 21st designated day, joining days like the 13th of January, which is Korean American Day, and the 7th of August, Purple Heart Recipient Recognition Day. We, of course, will be following that hot topic for Seahawk fans this session. Another bill we've talked about that is progressing, officially nicknaming the state as the Evergreen State. That had to actually be debated and passed out of a Senate committee and also off the Senate floor. It's been the state's unofficial nickname since the 1880s, but there is work this year to officially put that on the books. Christine. All
right, Drew, of course, we'll be watching it. We know you will as well. And for in-depth coverage throughout the legislative session, head on over to our free streaming app, King 5 Plus. Right now on the app, you can find extended versions of Drew's in-session reports available for streaming.